There are moments in life when a single choice, a single lie, a single moment of weakness can unravel everything you've built, destroy everyone you love, and leave behind nothing but wreckage and regret. What you're about to hear is the true story of a man who had it all, a woman who believed in him, families who trusted him, and the secret relationship that brought their entire world crashing down in ways no one could have ever imagined. This is a story about power, manipulation, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of choices made in the shadows. Before we begin, if you appreciate deep, thoughtful storytelling about real human experiences, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Love, Lies, and Crimes, where we explore the complex psychology behind the decisions that change lives forever. Michael Harrison was 43 years old when everything fell apart. He was the chief executive officer of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company based in Connecticut, a position he had worked toward his entire adult life. He came from humble beginnings, the son of a factory worker and a school cafeteria manager, and he had clawed his way up through sheer determination, intelligence, and an ability to read people that bordered on uncanny. By the time he reached the executive suite, Michael had a reputation as a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader, and a man who could turn struggling departments into profit centers within months. His employees admired him, his board trusted him, his wife Sarah believed in him completely. Sarah Harrison had been with Michael since college. They met in an economics class during their junior year, and there was an immediate connection. Sarah was smart, grounded, and came from a family that valued education and hard work. She saw something special in Michael, even when he was just an ambitious student with big dreams and no clear path forward. They married young, at 24, and Sarah put her own career aspirations on hold to support Michael's climb up the corporate ladder. She worked as a middle school teacher for several years, a job she loved, but when their first child was born, she made the decision to stay home full-time. By the time Michael became CEO, they had 3 children, a beautiful home in an affluent suburb, and what everyone around them considered a model marriage. But beneath the surface, something had been shifting for years. Michael's success came with increasing pressure, longer hours, and a lifestyle that kept him away from home more often than not. He traveled frequently for business, attended conferences, entertained clients, and spent late nights at the office. Sarah understood that these demands came with his position, and she never complained. She managed the household, raised their children, organized their social calendar, and maintained the image of the perfect executive family. But as the years went on, the emotional distance between them grew. They still appeared together at company events, smiled for photographs, and presented a united front to the world. In private, however, their conversations had become transactional, focused on schedules and logistics rather than dreams or feelings. The intimacy that once defined their relationship had slowly evaporated, replaced by routine and obligation. It was into this gradually hollowing marriage that Jennifer Caldwell entered. Jennifer was 28 years old when she joined the company as Michael's executive assistant. She had recently completed her MBA and was eager to prove herself in the corporate world. Jennifer came from a different background than Michael. Her parents were both professionals, a doctor and an attorney, and she had grown up with privilege and opportunity. She was intelligent, ambitious, and confident in ways that made her stand out immediately. During the interview process, Michael saw in her a reflection of his younger self, that same hunger to succeed, that same willingness to do whatever it took to get ahead. What no one could have known at that first meeting was that Jennifer was also in a committed relationship. She had been with David Chen for 4 years. They had met in graduate school, fallen in love quickly, and moved in shortly after graduating. David was a software engineer at a tech startup, thoughtful and steady in contrast to Jennifer's more intense and driven personality. They balanced each other well, or so it seemed. David envisioned a future with Jennifer that included marriage, children, and building a life together. Jennifer wanted those things too, or at least she thought she did. But she also wanted career success, recognition, and the validation that came from being exceptional at what she did. From her first day at the company, Jennifer threw herself into her work with complete dedication. As Michael's executive assistant, she was responsible for managing his schedule, coordinating with department heads, preparing briefing materials, and essentially serving as the gatekeeper to the CEO's office. It was a demanding role that required long hours, discretion, and an ability to anticipate needs before they were articulated. Jennifer excelled at all of it. Within weeks, Michael began to rely on her not just for administrative support, but for strategic input. He would bounce ideas off her, ask for her perspective on personnel decisions, and include her in meetings where executive assistants were not typically present. The relationship between them started as purely professional, but there was an undeniable energy in their interactions from the beginning. Michael found himself looking forward to their morning briefings, appreciating the way Jennifer challenged his thinking rather than simply agreeing with everything she said. Jennifer, for her part, was drawn to Michael's intelligence, his confidence, and the power he wielded so effortlessly. She told herself that what she felt was admiration, respect for a mentor who was teaching her how to navigate the corporate world. But somewhere beneath that rationalization, something else was growing, something neither of them was willing to acknowledge. The first shift happened during a business trip to a pharmaceutical conference in San Diego. Sarah had originally planned to accompany Michael, as she often did for major industry events, but their youngest child came down with a severe flu the week before, and she made the decision to stay home. Michael went alone, accompanied by Jennifer and 2 other executives. The days were filled with presentations, networking events, and client dinners. The evenings, however, had a different quality. After the formal obligations were complete, the group would often gather at the hotel bar to debrief and unwind. On the second night, the other executives retired early, leaving Michael and Jennifer alone. They talked for hours that night, not about work, but about their lives, their backgrounds, their fears and ambitions. Michael found himself sharing things he had not talked about in years, his insecurities about whether he truly deserved his success, his feeling that he was constantly performing a role rather than living authentically. Jennifer opened up about her own struggles, the pressure she felt to live up to her parents' expectations, the fear that no matter what she achieved, it would never feel like enough. There was a vulnerability in that conversation that neither of them had shown to anyone in a long time. When they finally said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, something had changed between them. A line had not been crossed, not yet, but it had become visible, and both of them knew it. After they returned from San Diego, the dynamic in the office was different. The professional boundaries that had existed before began to blur. Michael started finding reasons to keep Jennifer late at the office, working on projects that could have waited until morning. Jennifer never objected. She told David that the demands of the job required flexibility and long hours, which was true, but it was not the whole truth. The time she spent with Michael had taken on a quality that went beyond professional necessity. There were moments of eye contact that lasted a fraction too long, conversations that veered into personal territory, a gradual building of emotional intimacy that both of them recognized but neither wanted to stop. The affair began 4 months after Jennifer started working for Michael. It happened on a Thursday evening after everyone else had left the office. They had been working on a presentation for the board, and at some point the work stopped and the talking began. The conversation turned to their respective relationships. Michael admitted that his marriage had become more of a partnership than a romance, that he and Sarah functioned well as co-parents and co-managers of their life, but had lost the connection that once made them inseparable. Jennifer confessed that she sometimes felt suffocated in her relationship with David, that his steadiness felt like complacency, that she craved excitement and intensity that their life together did not provide. The admissions hung in the air between them, and then suddenly the distance collapsed. The kiss was inevitable, fueled by months of building tension and unspoken desire. What followed was not a moment of passion that they immediately regretted. It was the beginning of a secret relationship that would continue for nearly 2 years. They were careful, always careful. They never met at the same hotel twice. They never communicated about their relationship through company email or phones. Michael would create business reasons for trips that Jennifer would accompany him on. Jennifer became expert at crafting explanations for her absences that David never questioned. The lies came easily because they told themselves that what they were doing was not just about physical attraction. They convinced themselves that they had found something real, something meaningful, a connection that transcended the mundane realities of their official lives. But affairs conducted in secrecy carry their own peculiar psychology. The relationship between Michael and Jennifer existed in a bubble, removed from the complications and responsibilities of everyday life. When they were together, there were no children demanding attention, no spouses asking about their day, no bills to pay or household chores to manage. There was only the intensity of stolen moments, the thrill of risk, and the intoxication of feeling desired and understood. This created an illusion of perfection, a fantasy that bore little resemblance to what a real relationship, with all its challenges and compromises, would actually look like. Neither of them fully grasped this at the time. They were too caught up in the story they were telling themselves, that they were soulmates who had found each other despite impossible circumstances, that what they shared was worth the deception it required. While Michael and Jennifer were building their secret world, the people who loved them were experiencing the consequences of their absence, even if they could not name the cause. Sarah Harrison noticed that her husband seemed distracted, that he came home later than usual, even when he was not traveling, that he seemed less present during the rare family dinners they managed to have together. When she asked if everything was all right, Michael would reassure her that work was demanding but under control, that the stress was temporary, that things would settle down soon. Sarah wanted to believe him. She had invested 20 years in their marriage and was not eager to question the foundation of her entire adult life. So she pushed down her concerns and focused on what she could control: her children, her home, the routines that gave structure to her days. David Chen was experiencing a similar but different erosion. Jennifer had always been ambitious and career-focused, so her long hours did not initially raise red flags. But as the months progressed, he began to notice changes that were harder to explain away. Jennifer seemed emotionally distant, preoccupied even when they were together. Their conversations became superficial. The future they had talked about building together was no longer mentioned. When David tried to discuss their relationship, Jennifer would become defensive or dismissive, accusing him of being needy or not understanding the demands of her career. David started to feel like he was losing her, but he could not identify what he was losing her to. He blamed himself, wondering if he was not successful enough, exciting enough, interesting enough to hold her attention. The power dynamic between Michael and Jennifer added layers of complexity that neither of them fully acknowledged. Michael was not just Jennifer's lover, he was her boss, the person who controlled her career trajectory, her salary, her professional reputation. This imbalance meant that the relationship could never truly be between equals, no matter how much they told themselves otherwise. Jennifer may have felt empowered by the attention of a powerful man, but she was also in a fundamentally vulnerable position. If the relationship ended badly, if Michael decided to terminate it, or if it became public, Jennifer would almost certainly suffer greater consequences than Michael would. She was younger, less established, more replaceable. Michael held all the cards, even if he never explicitly wielded that power over her. There were moments when the unsustainability of the situation became apparent even to them. Jennifer would sometimes lie awake at night in the hotel rooms they shared, wondering what she was doing, what she was risking, what kind of person she had become. Michael would return home after being with Jennifer and see his children sleeping peacefully in their beds and feel a crushing weight of guilt that he would drink away or bury beneath rationalizations about how complicated life was, how he deserved happiness too, how he was not hurting anyone as long as no one found out. These moments of clarity were fleeting, easily pushed aside by the next opportunity to be together, the next rush of feeling alive and desired in ways their official lives no longer provided. The unraveling began with a coincidence, as these things often do. Sarah Harrison had a close friend named Patricia who worked in marketing at a competing pharmaceutical company. Patricia traveled in the same industry circles as Michael and had attended several of the same conferences over the years. During a lunch meeting between Sarah and Patricia, Patricia mentioned in passing that she had seen Michael at a conference in Boston a few months earlier. She said he had been having dinner at a restaurant near the convention center with a young woman she assumed was a colleague, and they had seemed very engaged in conversation. Patricia meant nothing by the comment, it was just casual industry gossip, but something in the way she said it made Sarah's stomach tighten. Sarah remembered that conference. Michael had told her it was going to be wall-to-wall meetings and networking, that he would barely have time to breathe, let alone enjoy the city. He had said he was exhausted and looking forward to getting home, but Patricia's observations suggested a different picture, one of a leisurely dinner with a female colleague, engaged conversation, the kind of scene that could be innocent or could be something entirely else. Sarah tried to dismiss her suspicions as paranoia, but the seed had been planted. She began to pay closer attention to Michael's schedule, his phone, his behavior when he came home from trips. It was Sarah's growing vigilance that led to the discovery. Michael had always been careful with his phone, but he was not perfect. One evening he came home from a late night at the office and fell asleep on the couch while watching television. His phone was on the coffee table, and for the first time in their marriage, Sarah picked it up. She didn't know his passcode, but the phone was unlocked because he had just been using it. Her hands were shaking as she opened his messages, not really knowing what she was looking for, hoping desperately that she would find nothing. What she found instead shattered her world. The messages were not explicitly sexual. Michael and Jennifer had been smart enough to avoid putting anything too incriminating in writing, but they were intimate in ways that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. References to when they would see each other next, inside jokes, terms of endearment disguised as professional courtesy. Sarah read through months of messages, each one a small knife cutting into everything she had believed about her life. When Michael woke up an hour later, Sarah was sitting in the chair across from him, with his phone in her hand and tears streaming down her face. The confrontation that followed was devastating. Michael's first instinct was to deny everything, to claim that Sarah was misinterpreting friendly professional messages, that she was being paranoid and irrational. But Sarah was not irrational. She had read enough to know the truth, and she demanded that Michael stop lying to her. The denials gave way to minimization. Michael admitted to having feelings for Jennifer, but claimed that nothing physical had happened, that it was just an emotional connection that had gotten out of hand. When Sarah pushed harder, armed with specific messages that clearly indicated otherwise, Michael finally broke down and admitted the affair. What followed was hours of painful conversation. Sarah wanted to know everything. How long had it been going on? How many times had they been together? Did he love Jennifer? Was he planning to leave his family? Michael tried to answer her questions, but every answer only created more pain. He insisted that he loved Sarah, that he had never wanted to hurt her, that the affair was a mistake born of stress and weakness and confusion. Sarah listened to his explanations with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The man she had built her entire adult life around, the father of her children, the person she had trusted completely, had been living a double life for nearly 2 years. Everything she thought she knew about their marriage, about him, about herself, had been based on lies. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Sarah told Michael to leave the house. He moved into a hotel, shell-shocked and beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had done. Sarah confided in her sister, who urged her to contact an attorney. The children knew something was wrong, but were not told the full truth, only that their father was traveling for work and that things were complicated. Sarah barely slept, barely ate, moving through her days in a fog of betrayal and confusion. She kept replaying their entire relationship in her mind, trying to identify the warning signs she had missed, the moments when she could have known, the ways she might have been responsible for Michael's choice to stray. While Sarah was processing her shattered world, Jennifer's life was also collapsing, though she did not yet know it. Michael, in his panic and guilt, made a decision that would have devastating consequences for Jennifer. He decided that he needed to end the affair immediately and completely, not through an honest conversation, but through silence and distance. He stopped answering Jennifer's messages. He stopped coming to the office. He communicated with her only through terse emails about work matters, using language that was cold and professional. Jennifer was confused and hurt, unable to understand why Michael had suddenly cut her off. She tried reaching out through the private channels they had established, but her messages went unanswered. She began to panic, wondering if he had been found out, if everything was about to come crashing down, if she was about to lose everything. The truth reached Jennifer not through Michael, but through the company rumor mill. Within days of Sarah's discovery, whispers began circulating among the executive team. Michael's sudden absence from the office, combined with his distracted and emotional demeanor during the few meetings he attended remotely, raised questions. Someone saw him checking into a hotel. Someone else overheard a tense phone conversation. The pieces came together quickly, and while no one initially knew the identity of the other woman, everyone knew that the CEO's marriage was in crisis. Jennifer heard the rumors and felt her stomach drop. She realized that Michael's withdrawal was not temporary, it was the end. He had chosen his marriage, or at least chosen to try to save it, and that meant cutting Jennifer out of his life completely. The realization that she had been discarded pushed Jennifer into her own crisis. She had sacrificed her relationship with David, her self-respect, and her professional credibility for a man who was now pretending she did not exist. The anger and hurt were overwhelming. In her pain, Jennifer made a choice that would seal everyone's fate. She decided to tell David the truth, not out of a desire to be honest, but out of a need to unburden herself, to make someone else feel the pain she was feeling. She told him everything: the affair, the lies, the trips, the hotel rooms, the promises Michael had made about leaving his wife eventually, the way she had deceived David for nearly 2 years. David's reaction was one of complete devastation. He had trusted Jennifer completely, never suspected that she was capable of this level of deception. The revelation did not just end their relationship, it destroyed his sense of reality. He questioned everything about the time they had spent together, wondering which moments had been real and which had been performances. He felt humiliated, betrayed, and profoundly alone. Unlike Sarah, who had children and a support system to fall back on, David had built his entire social life around Jennifer. Her betrayal left him isolated and spiraling. But David's pain did not end with the breakup. In the weeks that followed Jennifer's confession, David became consumed by anger. He felt that Michael, as the older and more powerful person in the affair, bore the greater responsibility. Michael had not just betrayed his own wife, he had enabled Jennifer to betray David. In David's mind, Michael was a predator who used his position and power to seduce a younger employee, destroying multiple lives in the process. This narrative, whether entirely accurate or not, took hold of David's thinking and drove him toward a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He decided to expose the affair publicly and to ensure that Michael faced professional consequences for his actions. David began by contacting the company's board of directors. He wrote a detailed letter outlining the affair between the CEO and his executive assistant, arguing that it represented a serious breach of corporate ethics, a violation of policies against workplace relationships between supervisors and subordinates, and a potential legal liability for the company. He did not have direct evidence, but he provided enough specific details, drawn from Jennifer's confession, to make the allegations credible and impossible to ignore. The letter reached the board chairman on a Tuesday morning, and by that afternoon, an emergency meeting had been convened. The board's response was swift and brutal. They immediately placed Michael on administrative leave pending an investigation. They hired an outside law firm to conduct interviews and review communications. They met with Jennifer, who by this point was terrified about her own future, and cooperated fully with the investigation, confirming the affair and providing details about its duration and nature. The investigation revealed not just the affair itself, but the ways in which company resources had been used to facilitate it, business trips that served dual purposes, expenses that were questionable at best, and a pattern of behavior that exposed the company to potential claims of favoritism, sexual harassment, and hostile work environment. Within 3 weeks of David's letter, the board made its decision. Michael Harrison was terminated as CEO effective immediately, with cause, which meant he forfeited his severance package and unvested stock options. The official statement cited violations of company ethics policies and conduct unbecoming of a leadership position. Jennifer Caldwell was also terminated, though her departure was framed as a resignation. The company moved quickly to distance itself from the scandal, promoting an internal candidate to interim CEO and releasing carefully worded statements about their commitment to ethical leadership and professional conduct. The professional consequences were devastating for both Michael and Jennifer, but they paled in comparison to the personal wreckage. Sarah Harrison filed for divorce within a month of discovering the affair. The divorce proceedings were bitter and complicated, involving disputes over asset division, custody arrangements, and support payments. Sarah's pain and anger were immense, and she made sure Michael understood the full cost of his choices. The children, now old enough to understand what had happened, struggled to process their father's betrayal. The oldest, a daughter in high school, stopped speaking to Michael entirely. The middle child, a son, alternated between anger and desperate attempts to understand why his father had done this. The youngest, still in elementary school, simply could not grasp why their family had fallen apart. Michael's fall from grace was complete and public. The industry that had once celebrated him now shunned him. Other companies were not interested in hiring a disgraced CEO with ethics violations on his record. His professional network evaporated almost overnight. Friends and colleagues who had sought his advice and company now avoided his calls. The financial impact was severe as well. The loss of his severance package and stock options, combined with the costs of divorce and the need to maintain 2 households, depleted savings that had once seemed secure. Michael had to sell the family home as part of the divorce settlement. He moved into a small apartment, a stark contrast to the life he had lived just months before. Jennifer's situation was equally grim. Her termination from the pharmaceutical company made it nearly impossible to find another executive assistant position, especially in the same industry. Potential employers who conducted reference checks quickly learned about the circumstances of her departure, and most chose not to take the risk. She eventually found work in a much lower-level administrative role at a nonprofit organization, making a fraction of her previous salary. Her relationship with her parents became strained when they learned the truth about why she had lost her job and ended her relationship with David. They were disappointed and confused, unable to reconcile the choices their daughter had made with the values they thought they had instilled in her. The psychological toll on everyone involved was profound and lasting. Sarah Harrison entered therapy to process the trauma of betrayal and the grief of losing the life she had built. She struggled with trust issues, self-doubt, and anger that sometimes felt consuming. She worked hard to shield her children from the worst of her pain, but they saw it anyway and carried their own scars. The oldest daughter developed anxiety and had difficulty forming close relationships, afraid that the people she loved would eventually hurt her the way her father had hurt her mother. The son acted out in school, his grades dropping as he struggled to make sense of a world that had become unpredictable and unsafe. David Chen's recovery was slow and painful. He withdrew from social activities and threw himself into his work, using long hours at the office to avoid confronting his feelings. He developed symptoms of depression and had difficulty sleeping. The betrayal shook his fundamental assumptions about relationships and trust. He questioned his own judgment, wondering how he could have been so blind to what was happening. It took him over a year to even consider dating again, and even then he found himself constantly looking for signs of deception, unable to fully trust anyone. Jennifer faced her own psychological reckoning. The affair and its aftermath forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, her values, and her choices. She had told herself that she was in love, that what she and Michael shared was special and worth the risks. But in the cold light of consequence, she had to acknowledge that she had participated in causing immense pain to innocent people. She had lied to someone who loved her, betrayed a person who had trusted her completely, and participated in the destruction of a family. The guilt was heavy and persistent. She also had to grapple with the power dynamics she had not fully understood while the affair was ongoing. Looking back, she could see how the imbalance between her and Michael had shaped their relationship in ways that were not healthy or equal. She had been flattered by his attention and seduced by his power, but she had also been in a vulnerable position that she had not fully recognized at the time. Michael Harrison's journey through the wreckage of his choices was perhaps the most complex. He had lost everything: his career, his marriage, his relationship with his children, his reputation, his financial security. In the immediate aftermath, he cycled through denial, self-pity, and rage. He blamed David for exposing the affair, blamed Jennifer for confessing to David, blamed the board for overreacting. But gradually, as months turned into years, the defense mechanisms began to crumble, and he was forced to confront the reality of his own responsibility. He had made every choice that led to this outcome. He had pursued Jennifer despite knowing he was married. He had lied repeatedly to Sarah. He had abused his position of power. He had risked everything for a relationship that existed primarily in fantasy, that could never have survived contact with the reality of everyday life. The path to any kind of redemption or healing was long and uncertain for everyone involved. Sarah eventually rebuilt a life for herself and her children. She returned to teaching, finding purpose and meaning in her work with students. She dated occasionally, but remained cautious about opening her heart fully to anyone new. Her primary focus was on her children, helping them heal and grow despite the trauma they had experienced. The process was gradual and imperfect, marked by setbacks and difficult moments, but also by resilience and small victories. Michael's relationship with his children remained fractured. His oldest daughter maintained her distance, communicating with him only when absolutely necessary. The son eventually developed a tentative connection with his father, though it was marked by wariness and hurt. The youngest child, as she grew older and understood more fully what had happened, struggled with her own feelings of betrayal and confusion. Michael tried to be present in their lives in whatever limited ways they would allow, but he understood that he had forfeited the right to be the father he once was. The trust was broken, and rebuilding it, if it was even possible, would take decades. Jennifer eventually moved to a different city, seeking a fresh start away from the memories and the judgment of people who knew her story. She continued in therapy, working through the layers of guilt, regret, and self-examination that the affair had triggered. She learned about the patterns that had made her vulnerable to the affair, her need for external validation, her fear of ordinariness, her tendency to avoid difficult truths in her relationships. The work was painful but necessary. Over time, she developed a more honest understanding of herself and a commitment to living with greater integrity, though she knew she would carry the weight of her choices. David's healing took its own form. He eventually reconnected with old friends he had neglected during his relationship with Jennifer, rebuilt his social support network, and slowly began to trust again. He met someone new several years later, a relationship he approached with much greater awareness and caution. The experience with Jennifer had changed him fundamentally, made him less naive, but also, eventually, more compassionate. He came to understand that people are complex and flawed, that even good people can make terrible choices, and that healing from betrayal requires not just time, but active work to process pain and rebuild the capacity for connection. The story of Michael Harrison, Jennifer Caldwell, Sarah Harrison, and David Chen is not unique.
Variations of it play out in workplaces and families across the world every day. The specific details differ, but the underlying dynamics remain remarkably consistent. A person in power, often a man, begins an inappropriate relationship with someone in a subordinate position. Both parties convince themselves that what they are doing is justified, that their connection is special, and that the rules that apply to others do not apply to them. They construct elaborate rationalizations and maintain carefully crafted deceptions. Meanwhile, the partners they are betraying live with growing but often unacknowledged unease, sensing that something is wrong but unable or unwilling to name it. When the truth inevitably emerges, the destruction is comprehensive, affecting not just the primary players, but children, extended family, colleagues, and entire communities. What makes these situations particularly insidious is the way they exploit fundamental human vulnerabilities. The need to feel desired and valued, the temptation to escape from difficult or mundane aspects of our lives into fantasy and excitement, the capacity for self-deception that allows us to act in ways that contradict our stated values while maintaining a positive self-image. Michael and Jennifer were not monsters. They were ordinary people who made a series of choices, each one seeming manageable in isolation, that collectively led to catastrophic consequences. The first boundary crossed made the next one easier. The first lie told made subsequent lies feel necessary to maintain the deception. The initial excitement of the forbidden made it difficult to step back and assess the situation rationally.
The power imbalance between Michael and Jennifer adds a critical dimension that cannot be overlooked. In workplace relationships where one person has authority over the other's employment, advancement, and professional future, there is an inherent inequality that shapes every interaction. Even if both parties believe the relationship is consensual and mutual, the subordinate person can never fully act as an equal. There is always the implicit or explicit understanding that their career depends on the goodwill of their superior. This dynamic creates conditions where manipulation can occur, even without conscious intent, where a subordinate may feel pressured to reciprocate attention or affection for fear of professional consequences, where the ability to freely consent is compromised by the realities of the power structure. In Michael and Jennifer's case, while Jennifer actively participated in the affair and made her own choices to deceive David, she was also in a position where saying no to Michael's advances could have had career implications. Michael may not have explicitly threatened her job, but the threat was inherent in their respective positions. This does not absolve Jennifer of responsibility for her actions, but it does complicate the narrative of two equal adults making free choices. The corporate world, like many hierarchical institutions, creates conditions where these dynamics can flourish and often fails to adequately protect employees in subordinate positions from the potential for exploitation. The warning signs of affairs like Michael and Jennifer's are often visible to those willing to see them, though they are easy to rationalize or dismiss in the moment. Increasing emotional distance in primary relationships, sudden changes in work patterns or travel schedules, defensiveness when asked simple questions about time or activities, growing investment in appearance or changes in personal habits, secretiveness about phones or email, a partner who seems distracted or preoccupied even when physically present. None of these signs prove infidelity on their own, but patterns of multiple warning signs should prompt honest conversation and attention. Sarah noticed some of these changes in Michael, but chose to trust rather than confront, a decision that many betrayed partners make and later regret. Equally important are the warning signs within the person contemplating or engaged in an affair, rationalizing behavior that contradicts stated values, increasing compartmentalization of different areas of life, avoiding deep reflection about the potential consequences of actions, telling oneself stories about being special or exempt from ordinary rules and outcomes, deriving increasing amounts of emotional energy and validation from someone other than a committed partner, engaging in deception and finding it easier over time.
These internal warning signs indicate that a person is moving down a path that is likely to end in destruction, but they are often ignored or explained away because the immediate emotional rewards of the affair feel more powerful than the abstract future consequences. For anyone who finds themselves in a situation similar to Sarah's or David's, discovering that a partner has been unfaithful, the path forward is intensely personal and there is no single right answer. Some relationships survive infidelity and even become stronger through the painful process of rebuilding trust, though this requires complete honesty, genuine remorse, willingness to take full responsibility, and sustained effort over years from the person who betrayed the trust. Many relationships do not survive, and choosing to leave is a valid and often necessary response to betrayal, particularly when the unfaithful partner minimizes what they have done, blames the betrayed partner, or is unwilling to do the difficult work of change. What matters most is that the betrayed person gets support, whether through therapy, trusted friends, or family, and makes decisions based on their own well-being and values, rather than shame, fear, or pressure from others. For those who, like Michael or Jennifer, find themselves having crossed boundaries they never thought they would cross, the only ethical path forward is radical honesty and acceptance of consequences. Continuing deception only compounds the harm. Coming clean, even knowing it will hurt people and destroy the life you have been living, is the only way to begin to act with integrity again. This does not mean that confession absolves the person or makes everything right, but it does mean taking responsibility for the choices made and facing whatever consequences follow. The temptation to minimize, to tell partial truths, to manage the narrative in self-serving ways is enormous, but it only extends the betrayal and prevents any possibility of genuine healing for anyone involved. The children in situations like these are often the forgotten victims, and their trauma deserves particular attention. When parents divorce due to infidelity, children lose not just the intact family structure, but also the sense of security that comes from believing their parents are trustworthy and stable. They may blame themselves, wondering if they had been better behaved or more lovable, whether their parent would not have strayed. They may develop difficulty trusting relationships in their own lives, fearing that anyone they love will eventually betray them. They may carry anger toward the parent who had the affair, but also complicated feelings toward the other parent, sometimes resenting them for perceived weakness or for changing the family dynamic by choosing to divorce. Supporting children through this requires honest, age-appropriate communication, consistent reassurance that the situation was not their fault, and often professional help to process complex emotions. The workplace ramifications of affairs between supervisors and subordinates extend beyond the individuals directly involved. When such relationships become known, they create cynicism and distrust throughout an organization. Other employees wonder whether advancement and opportunities are based on merit or favoritism. The professional environment becomes toxic as people take sides or distance themselves from the drama. The organization's reputation can suffer, particularly if the situation becomes public or results in legal action. This is why most companies have policies prohibiting or heavily regulating romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates, and why violations of these policies often result in termination even when both parties claim the relationship was consensual. The broader cultural conversation about power, consent, and workplace relationships has evolved significantly in recent years, driven in part by movements that have called attention to the ways power imbalances create conditions for exploitation and abuse. While not every relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate is abusive, the inherent inequality means that such relationships require extreme caution and scrutiny. The safest and most ethical course is for people in positions of authority to maintain clear professional boundaries with those they supervise, to seek romantic connections outside the workplace, or at minimum with people over whom they have no authority, and to be acutely aware of the ways their position might influence the behavior and choices of those with less power. The long-term consequences of affairs like the one between Michael and Jennifer ripple outward in ways that are difficult to fully measure or predict. Families are restructured, children's life trajectories are altered, financial stability is disrupted, professional networks are damaged, communities of friends and colleagues are divided. The psychological impact can persist for decades, affecting not just the primary individuals, but the next generation as children carry forward patterns and wounds into their own relationships.
At the same time, human beings have remarkable capacity for resilience and growth. The people in this story, like many who have lived through similar experiences, faced the possibility of allowing betrayal and pain to define them permanently, or choosing to engage in the difficult work of healing and transformation. Sarah had to rediscover who she was apart from being Michael's wife, and rebuild a sense of self-worth that was not dependent on her marriage. David had to learn to trust again and develop a more nuanced understanding of relationships and human nature. Jennifer had to confront her own capacity for selfishness and deception and commit to living with greater integrity. Michael had to accept that he had destroyed what mattered most and find some way to live with that knowledge while trying to be a better person going forward. None of these journeys were linear or simple. Healing from betrayal does not follow a neat timeline or predictable stages. There are setbacks and moments of profound despair. There are days when the progress feels impossible and the pain feels fresh, even years after the initial discovery. But there are also moments of unexpected grace, times when connection feels possible again, days when the weight lifts slightly and life begins to feel bearable and even occasionally joyful. The path through this kind of trauma requires patience, support, self-compassion, and a willingness to feel the full range of difficult emotions rather than numbing or avoiding them. For anyone watching this who has experienced betrayal, who has been the person who betrayed, or who is currently navigating complicated relationship dynamics, there are lessons here worth considering. The first is that deception, even when it seems victimless or manageable, creates a foundation of instability that will eventually collapse. The truth finds its way out, and the longer the deception continues, the more devastating the fallout when it ends. The second is that the choices we make when we feel powerless or when we are swept up in intensity and desire have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves, affecting people we love and people we may never meet. The third is that power imbalances in relationships, whether in the workplace or elsewhere, create conditions that require heightened awareness and restraint from the person in the position of greater power. The fourth is that healing from profound betrayal is possible, but requires time, support, honesty, and sustained effort. As we bring this story to a close, it is important to acknowledge that there is no simple moral or tidy ending. Michael, Jennifer, Sarah, and David continue to live with the consequences of what happened. Some days are better than others. Some relationships have found a fragile new equilibrium, while others remain broken. The children grow older and form their own understandings of what happened and what it means for their lives. The story does not wrap up neatly because life does not work that way, but perhaps there is value in sitting with the messiness and complexity, in recognizing that human beings are capable of both tremendous harm and remarkable resilience, and that the choices we make in moments of temptation or weakness can echo through decades. If this story has resonated with you, if it has prompted reflection on your own relationships or experiences, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations about trust, power, betrayal, and healing are important, and hearing different perspectives helps all of us understand the complexity of human relationships more fully. If you found value in this exploration of a difficult topic, please consider sharing this video with someone who might benefit from hearing it. These are the kinds of stories we explore here on Love, Lies, and Crimes, examining the psychology and human dynamics behind decisions that change lives, not to judge, but to understand. The story of Michael Harrison's secret relationship and the two families it destroyed is ultimately a story about choices and consequences, about the gap between who we want to be and who we become when we act from our weakest impulses rather than our deepest values. It is a reminder that the people we hurt through our choices are not abstractions. They are human beings with their own hopes and pain and capacity for suffering.
It is a call to approach our relationships with honesty, to be aware of the power we hold and how we use it, and to understand that the temporary excitement of forbidden connection cannot outweigh the lasting damage of betrayal. And it is a testament to the human capacity to survive devastating pain, to slowly rebuild broken lives, and to find meaning and purpose, even after everything falls apart.